people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
De la noche, Stephanie Piñeiro.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. A back-and-forth exchange between the reigning WBC lightweight champion, Shakur Stevenson, and the reigning WBO champion at super lightweight, Teofimo Lopez. Shakur said, "You called me out, little dude. I told you I'm down." To which Teofimo responded, "It's going to feel good when this little dude makes you his little bitch in January. I suggest you take all that snack you possibly can, and even that won't help." To which young Shakur responded, "You know what feels even better? You agreeing to the fight now. Shut your pussy ass up and make it happen." Wait, so they're gonna fight in January? Because that's what Teofimo said. January. And Shakur said that he agreed to the fight. Shakur has already boxed 2 times this year. Once in February, then again last month. There is still enough time remaining that he could theoretically box again before this year is out, but it doesn't sound like he's going to. At the same time, Brian Garcia said of Teofimo Lopez, "I seriously believe I would knock him out with my punch selection and output. The way I throw punches, I would crack him. I'm definitely his kryptonite. I've been wanting that fight for a long time." Teofimo seems to have responded by saying, "My team told Oscar De La Hoya we'd like to fight Ryan Garcia next, and his management turned it down." To which Brian responded, cap. "Sorry you guys have to deal with this." Sorry is right. Looking at all these back and forth exchanges between these American youngsters, these American boxers, I didn't get the least bit excited. I mean, I was just bored reading through the whole thing. More of the same. Earlier this week, I came across an article from the New York Post. Las Vegas tourism is sinking, and young Americans may be to blame. The way these stories interconnect is Vegas has often been dubbed the Mecca of boxing, the hub for modern boxing. Would seem not anymore. Not with young boxers like these that don't get anybody excited. How many back and forth exchanges have we seen from these young fighters? Not just Ryan, not just Teofimo, not just Shakur, but in general. One could argue it's the industry standard in this digital era. So Ryan Garcia will have only seen action once this entire calendar year because it doesn't look like he's going to box again this one. And the same applies to Teofimo. He would have only boxed once. If you're talking about fighting Shakur in January... You taking the rest of the year off? Let's focus on that for a second. If Shakur and Teofimo are to fight, who is going to pay for it? Who is going to bankroll that very expensive show, that very expensive fight? The name that almost immediately comes to mind is Turkey El El Sheikh. Has he since walked back his thoughts on Teofimo, who he said disrespected his country and his religion? Have they made amends? Is he going to use him for one of his shows? A show in January, perhaps? I'm not sure. I can't be bothered to spend too much time on this because it's all so immaterial and, frankly, so boring. Boring! These kids cackling at each other through their phones, through their social media. I'm not the least bit interested, I'm not. And Brian? I couldn't give less of a fuck about Brian. I mean, I don't even have a fuck to give when it comes to Brian Garcia, who claims he's gonna knock out Teofimo where he couldn't knock out Rolly Romero. Couldn't even knock him down. Couldn't even win. So when he starts harping about what he's going to do to Teofimo, that he's going to do this and he's going to do that, mean, are you serious, man?
Whatever.
Men's light heavyweight news. David Benavidez, ahead of the Anthony Yarde fight, stated, "Right now, I'm in a position where my opportunity is in the form of a freaking Russian monster, so I can't say no if they offer me the fight. I can't say no." But he has said no before.
5 years ago.
5 years ago, in 2020, when he missed weight at 168, and he was offered a number one spot at 175 via the WBC to line him up for an Artur Beterbiev fight. And then they chose to stay down. They chose to stay at 168, even though they had a direct line to Beterbiev.
5 years later, it's not saying that Artur Beterbiev is all of a sudden a walk in the park and easy out, because he isn't.
So often I hear people say that Dmitry Bivol tried to age out Artur Beterbiev. Dmitry Bivol was waiting him out when nothing could be further from the truth. I would sooner say that about David than I would about Dmitry.
You didn't want him until much later on, even though he was already offered to you. You didn't want him until he was 40 years old, and coming off a loss, you didn't want him.
But still, this is one of the very best fights to make at 175. This is still a fight that I would like to see, provided that both fighters take care of business in November. They're going to be boxing on the same show. Artur against Dion Nicholson and David against Anthony Yarde.
Great card.
In spite of the collapse of the Beterbiev versus Bivol trilogy, before we got here, the reception to it was lukewarm. I saw a lot of people saying that they would prefer to see those fighters fight somebody else, then maybe circle back to each other.
I don't mind this run of fights. It livens up the light heavyweight division that not so much is riding on just two guys, two primarily. There's fights all over the place. There are fights going on. Artur's got a fight. David's got a fight.
Got a fight?
Fights are happening. Can we expect David Benavidez to follow through, to make good on his word?
All I know is that back at the PBC, they don't have anybody for him to fight. They barely have any money, barely any fight dates, so it's not like he can go back there and everything's all sunshine and rainbows. It's not. The biggest opportunities for David, now that he's campaigning as a light heavyweight, are with Turkey. They are in Saudi.
The only chance to make life-altering money.
My previous videos, I've talked about what it communicates, that David Benavidez, one of the few flagship fighters the PBC has left, has been outsourced to a Turkey El Sheikh show. That is a big deal, because that's basically saying, if you guys felt that you could make money off of David's next fight, then you'd be making David's next fight. But because you're not,
That tells the story.
at this point, you make more money renting David out to somebody else than paying to do his next fight yourself, because who was he gonna fight next anyway? They couldn't make it happen with Callum Smith, remember?
I feel like David may very well be out of alternatives, and fighting Artur, at least momentarily, may be his best option, his biggest option.
And I feel like Artur all of a sudden boxing on the same show as David, that's not an accident. You know what Turkey's got in mind. If Artur wins his fight and David wins his, they may face each other at some point next year. That is something to look forward to. Pressure fighter versus pressure fighter. Old line versus young line.
Old lion versus young lion.
Now, this is a fight that we've talked about here and there over the years, how Artur Beterbiev is a better grade and a better version of a pressure fighter than young David Benavidez, albeit older than David Benavidez. Older by a lot.
But still better. I mean, that's why David turned him down in 2020. He knew what he was doing.
So now we're going to keep a close eye on Artur's next performance to see if Father Time doesn't show up, because he really didn't show up in his last fight with Dmitry Bivol. Artur still looked dangerous, still looked powerful, and Dmitry eked that win out and won by the skin of his teeth.
But it's not like Artur looked old. Certainly didn't look shot. Looked just as capable, just as dangerous as he usually looks. And, most light heavyweights don't have the maneuvering ability, the defense, or the ring savvy of a Dmitry Bivol.
David doesn't, because David's not a boxer. David's a mauler. David's a brawler. David, like Artur Beterbiev, is a pressure fighter, just a lower grade of pressure fighter, in the lower tier, that if Artur is a A- or an A+, David would be
B- or a B+. Same base style, different grade.
It's not a mystery who the bigger puncher between them is. Up until the Dmitry Bivol fights, Artur Beterbiev had knocked out every light heavyweight they put in front of him, whereas David, since moving up to light heavyweight, he doesn't knock people out anymore, doesn't even knock people down.
David's power at 175 isn't what it was at 168, and it certainly doesn't rival Artur Beterbiev's.
Let's talk about footwork, let's talk about movement. Even though all pressure fighters have a propensity to move forward and engage, in terms of footwork, there's a clear distinction between Artur Beterbiev and David Benavidez. David Benavidez stomps around like a Clydesdale.
He's flat-footed.
Whereas Artur has that trademark Soviet pendulum step that we see from a lot of fighters that hail from that region.
Artur's on his toes more than your average pressure fighter, that he's on the balls of his feet.
Powering forward with very short punches, short jabs, short hooks. He's naturally heavy-handed, so he doesn't bother to load up the punches. He shoots from the hip.
He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to wind them up to generate power. There's power on everything he throws.
David Benavidez, comparatively, doesn't pack as much power and swings a lot wider than Artur Beterbiev. He's the taller, longer guy with the wider punches, which means there are bigger holes in between to put punches in there.
And this would be the biggest puncher that David Benavidez would have ever fought.
But not the biggest puncher that Artur Beterbiev would have ever fought. He's been in there with bangers more than once, like Callum Johnson, Joe Smith Jr.,
Those guys hit hard.
Alexander Vozdik. The same Vozdik that put Adonis Stevenson in a coma is the same Vozdik that Artur Beterbiev slapped around and retired for 2 years.
Same Vozdik that Artur Beterbiev stopped is the same Vozdik that David Benavidez couldn't stop. Couldn't even knock him down.
Audit their power, audit their resumes. There's no area where David Benavidez is better than Artur Beterbiev. He's just marginally bigger and younger, but not better in any particular area.
I feel like David's only out is that Artur Beterbiev is 40 years old. Father Time does have a way of just suddenly catching up to guys.
I feel like that's his only out because he doesn't actually do anything better than Artur Beterbiev. He doesn't have better footwork, better movement, better shot selection. He doesn't pack a bigger punch. He doesn't have bigger power.
He doesn't have a better resume.
He doesn't have better career accolades. Don't forget that Artur Beterbiev not only reigned as an unbeaten champion for years, but all before losing, he became undisputed. David never did that.
David Benavidez never so much as unified a title at a weight where he was campaigning, whereas Artur, he was unified for years and undisputed up until recently.
Less Father Time shows up. I got Artur stopping him. Elsewhere in the light heavyweight division, former Olympian Joshua Buatsi is set to make his Queensberry Promotions debut on November 1st, having migrated from boxer over to Queensberry. He's set to face Zach Parker. You may be familiar with that name. That's the same Zach Parker that used to campaign at 168. That's the same Zach Parker that was outdogged by John Ryder.
31 years old.
Now campaigning as a light heavyweight, Zach has been up there for approximately 4 fights for the last 2 years. Currently on a 4-fight winning streak where Joshua Buatsi is on the bounce, on the rebound, having suffered his first loss to Callum Smith. Sporting a professional record of 19 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 13 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 20 professional bouts, though in his last fight, he came close, as he was on the receiving end of some bombs from Callum Smith. But he endured, he weathered the storm, and finished the fight on his feet.
Zach Parker.
Zach Parker sports a professional record of 26 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 18 knockouts, having been knocked out once in 27 professional bouts. That is the John Ryder fight I mentioned earlier. Zach didn't finish the fight. Contest was ended after 4 rounds. Zach could no longer continue.
So in that way, if John Ryder was too much for Zach at 168, I reckon that Joshua Buatsi might be too much for him at 175. And I understand that John is a very different fighter from Joshua Buatsi.
John is a pressure fighter, whereas Joshua is a boxer, a thinker. All the same, I favor Joshua Buatsi to win the fight. Joshua Buatsi, who has boxed under the Matchroom banner, then the Boxer banner, now the Queensberry Promotions banner. He's been around.
And I remember when he left Matchroom for Boxer, he said he didn't want to box on an app because he felt he wasn't getting enough exposure on an app, that it may be too difficult to find. His fights may be too difficult to get to, and so he migrated to Boxer, just to end up back on the same app that he left. Just to end up back on DAZN under a different banner, but all the same, it's the same platform. Another indicator of Boxer's current situation now that they're not with Sky Sports. Just a day or so ago, it was officially announced that their fights would be on BBC moving forward. BBC iPlayer. Big black cock?
It's the British Broadcasting Corporation. We've been talking a lot about the future of Boxer, and now, what does it mean that they're on BBC? See, BBC is one of the oldest broadcasters in the United Kingdom.
It's a terrestrial network.
But it being a terrestrial network as opposed to a niche network, a sports network like Sky, BBC's not going to throw the same money at boxing matches that Sky was throwing on boxing matches. And Joshua Buatsi going to Queensberry.
You can expect to see more of that, I think.
What were Boxer's flagship fighters may now decide to jump ship because Boxer is going to be operating at a reduced capacity. Not as much money, not as many fight dates, bigger and better opportunities elsewhere.
And this deal that Boxer is said to have inked with BBC is only for a year, I'm told. It's not a 4 or 5 year deal like what they had on Sky, so this isn't gonna last long.
Meaning that Joshua Buatsi jumped ship at the most opportune time, at the right time. He's proven himself a shrewd businessman of sorts. He got while the getting was good on Boxer when they were on Sky. Then when he saw rough seas ahead, that's when he decided to get out of there, to get out of Dodge and go someplace else. He's on Queensberry now, that seems to have quite the gene pool at 175. They've got quite a few light heavyweights that he can fight. One in particular.
What?
Anthony Yarde, who's set to be facing David Benavidez in November. Just imagine if Anthony upsets David, how much bigger that would make a Buatsi fight. See, if Anthony Yarde wins, I don't think he goes on to have a rematch with Artur Beterbiev.
No. Artur only comes into it if David wins. But if Anthony wins...
If Anthony becomes WBC light heavyweight champion, I could see old Fish Eyes Frank Warren staging a big-time fight, big fight in the UK between the newly crowned WBC champion and Joshua Buatsi. That is still a moneymaker. That is still a big fight.
Big.
All Joshua Buatsi has to do is get himself back in the winner's bracket against Zach Parker, and I think that he can. I think that he will. Anthony has to hold up his end of the bargain.
He's got to beat David.
I think that a fight between them can happen, even if Anthony doesn't beat David. But just imagine if he does. Just imagine if he upsets the plans for the Mexican Monster and takes the green and gold title away from him. That would certainly lend itself to the scale of a Buatsi showdown.
We'll see what happens in the fall.